delve into what next, I wanted to essentially take a few minutes, 1 minute, to remind ourselves of the context. Why is it that we are here in the first place? It's underneath all the stuff that we've been talking about is something that many of your countries are facing, and we already started alluding to it this morning in this morning's presentation, which is about the climate finance readiness challenge. There are several issues here. One is that there is a sort of a growing volume of funding instruments and funding mechanisms that are emerging all over the place for countries to access. At the same time, there is a recognition that public finance, whether it is international or domestic, is not going to be sufficient to deal with some of the challenges that lie ahead, and therefore there's a need to somehow prioritize and know where we are getting the most return for every investment that we want to make, and so on and so forth. And in order to do that, we all recognize that there are various capacity limitations right now. There is a limitation, there are national capacity limitations in terms of understanding how to navigate this new and emerging architecture. There is a need to catalyze private finance and private sector involvement and engagement. And there's a clear need to link the climate and development agendas, because these two things are intricately connected. And we also recognize that in order to address those capacity limitations, there are various capacities at the individual skills level, at the institutional level, and at the policy level that need to be addressed. And we've thought through various things that are required, including sector-level analysis and investment appraisal, cost-benefit analysis. We've talked about the expenditure reviews. We've talked about this consensual stakeholder engagement process that has to take place in each of your countries, and ultimately result in various strategic frameworks that foster advanced climate resilient development. And the work that we've been talking about in the context of this meeting on cost-benefit analysis has its place in terms of influencing sectoral policies, in terms of supporting project and program formulation, and so on and so forth. So it'll be good to sort of bear that in the back of our minds. And of course, the bigger picture is that this work will contribute towards our country's broader objective of advancing low-emission climate resilient development because of both the distinctness but also the linkages between adaptation and low-emission development. And the need to develop enabling environments to catalyze finance, to implement activities and achieve results through that financing, through which we can learn, because there's a lot that we don't know, and that in itself needs to inform our strategic frameworks and our way forwards in every single country. And each country will have its own way of moving forwards. So great, that's the big picture. So where are we? Well, we know right now, as far as adaptation is concerned, that all countries represented here, bar maybe one or two, have various initiatives that are ongoing through financing from the Least Developed Country Fund, the Special Climate Change Fund, and or the Adaptation Fund. Mongolia, we talked about that. They have a project that's focused on ecosystem-based adaptation, where there's a need to, where financing has been put in place to develop capacities within Mongolia to integrate climate change into land and water resources management. Bangladesh, where the project is in place to develop capacity of coastal communities for dealing with climate risks, for supporting advancing afforestation, where investment decisions have to be made, where local government capacities have to be developed and strengthened to advance climate risk management. Vietnam. This is an initiative that UNDP is supporting together with the Asian Development Bank, where part of the focus of this project is on updating coastal management plans, development policies, and so on. And I'm not going to go into all of these, but the list is endless. Now, what is missing in many of these initiatives, and I can say this with absolute certainty, is that all of them have their shortcomings in terms of the underlying economics. This is not something that has been factored into the project design phase, but it is also something that has to be done in the context of achieving some of the results that you see up here. Because every single dollar that has been allocated through this initiative will be faced with various choices. Do we invest in this? Do we invest in that? So economics of adaptation is going to be necessary, is necessarily going to be applied in each of these country contexts and in each of these initiatives. On top of that, we know of an emerging topic or initiative or program that many of your countries will commence next year. And this has to do with the national adaptation plans, and the negotiators in this group will know would know most about it. The least developed country negotiators will be particularly conversant with it, but even those from non-LDCs. And the NAP work is slated to begin next year. It's going to be one of the major topics, if at all perhaps the only main topic in Doha, where part of the focus will be on also non-LDCs getting organized to advance the NAP work in each of their countries. And what this is, and it's very, very different from NAPAs, for those of you who are familiar with NAPAs, what this is essentially an effort to support existing development planning processes, existing sectoral planning processes, to internalize climate change into those mechanisms. So it's not about coming up with a report. It's not about having a nice glossy report at the end and say, here's our NAP. It's really about identifying those gaps within your existing development planning, sectoral planning processes to ensure that climate change is reflected in that. And this work will commence. It's something that UNDP and together with UNEP and the GEF will certainly be advancing, beginning with the least developed countries from 2013 onwards. It's not going to be just UNDP and UNEP. There are many other agencies who are also going to be very supportive of it. And this is work in progress. And of course, the NAPs are going to be important for countries because of the Green Climate Fund. Because ultimately, many of the financing from the Green Climate Fund one of the requirements or criteria will be, well, how is the financing that is being asked for aligned with and linked with the national adaptation plans. All right, so what did we hear from you over the last couple of days? We heard about a demand for a better understanding of the economics of climate change adaptation at both the technical and policy level. We heard from you, and there were many sectors that all of you talked about, but agriculture and water came out the most prominently. You also mentioned not just the sectoral issues, but the intersectoral issues that have to be considered. We talked about training personnel at the country level. You talked about intra-ministry capacity development. We talked about raising the awareness of high-level policymakers and ensuring that issues that emerge through this body of work that we will embark on is communicated and speak to what is of importance to them. And this is something that even Ratin alluded to on day one, which is, he said, well, the agenda is boring. In a way, I completely agree with him, because what he was saying was, whatever work you're doing, make sure that you present it in a way that actually matters to people who ultimately decide on sector budget allocations and so on. So yes, we do have to speak the language of those individuals and institutions, and hopefully some of the work that we will be starting through this initiative will do that. It will address issues of inequality and equity. It will look at things like gender. It will speak to issues of sort of development paybacks. I think that was a term that Ratin used, that you can then use. All right, we then talked about various tools. We talked about sector and intersectoral analysis. We talked about market and non-market valuation techniques. We talked about the need to better get informed about investment appraisal, both portfolio. Well, we've talked about projects, but clearly it's not about discrete projects. At the end of the day, all projects add up to a portfolio, but you need the skills to be able to look at those things. We also talked about looking at key issues, such as short-term issues, long-term issues, issues of equity, gender, distributional impacts, and so on and so forth. All of these things came up over the last couple of days. So, did I miss anything? All right, well, you'll have a chance to talk. So, taking all of that information into account, last night we had a meeting, Bob, Robert, Lee, and Brad, and others, Priya. And our job was, well, here's all the demand. Now, what can we possibly do given where we are with this program and so on and so forth. So we agreed that we will use this program to build your technical capacities to conduct assessments on the economics of adaptation for portfolio project level appraisals, as well as sectoral and cross-sectoral planning. So the idea is that your capacities, your individual, well, when I say your, I mean I'm assuming all the people behind you that are not here in this room, their capacities to be able to do this kind of work. We also agreed that we will try and use this program to support decision makers to become more aware of the importance of these issues, including people in finance and planning who are at a more senior level, so that we can hopefully make a contribution, and this is going to be a contribution towards your efforts to advance climate resilient development. I say this because this surely cannot be the answer to all your needs. There are various other things that are going on, CPIR exercises we talked about, various initiatives that are also going to be very relevant and aligned and linked to this. And it's going to be your job to ensure that when this, the support that you receive through this program will cleanly and nicely embed within other initiatives that are ongoing. We decided that based on your input, we won't cover all sectors that were mentioned here because that will be just doing too much. Instead, we will focus on two that resonated most frequently, which was the agriculture and water sector. So we will start with those, right? Eventually, later on, perhaps if we are able to incentivize other partners, we can look at some of these other sectors, health being one of them. I know WHO is very keen to do this. If I will speak with WHO, and if they're interested, that's something that they can also come in on. But for now, this program will focus on agriculture and water. And water is going to be broadly defined. We're going to cover things like flooding, inundation, and so on and so forth. Okay? And by the way, these are also your priorities in the National Communications and NAPAs. So it's a nice fit. So what kinds of questions will you be able to answer? Well, we gave a taste of, we put some questions together that hopefully through this capacity building effort and the work that you will be undertaking and capacitated to do, you'll be able to answer questions like, well, what does it involve to manage water and agriculture under current climate conditions? How are those plans going to be adjusted, or how will they need to be adjusted as climate changes? We'll provide training on how you can evaluate a portfolio of initiatives, like the Kulna project that we talked about. It doesn't have to be at that scale, it can be smaller, but many of you talked about the need to submit proposals to your finance ministries in order to receive finance from domestic budgets for various projects, and those projects are missing the cost-benefit analysis. So hopefully we can provide you with enough information and skills so that you can then introduce that element into your various proposals within your existing systems. Will you be able to answer questions like what are the most profitable or efficient choices? And profitable, we're not only talking about money, you can define it any way you want to define it, but essentially the most efficient choices for farmers in different regions. What type of farms, what crops, what livestock, how much irrigation, how much input. These are all very relevant questions for policy purposes because they will inform what policymakers would need to do in order to ensure that households, smallholders, etc., are able to do what they need to do in order to adjust, to make the right adjustments. How do these choices change as market conditions, such as prices, change? Essentially being able to answer some of these questions that can help inform policy processes. And how do these choices change as climate itself changes? So we showed you some results from other studies that have been done in other places where we looked at how crop choice is likely to change, how livestock choices are expected to change, and so on and so forth. You'll be able to answer questions like on water allocation. What are the implications of water allocation choices or decisions on various constituents? Urban users, rural users, rich households, poor households. You'll be able to apply the tools in order to be able to understand some of these questions better. And how should water be allocated in various years where there are shortages? What are the implications of that? What are the overall welfare implications? And so on and so forth. So what do we expect at the end of it? Well, we expect that your national plans and strategies that you are already developing and you already have processes to advance will start internalizing climate change, the economics of climate change into those. So this is not about starting a parallel, separate initiative, but it's really about supporting what is already ongoing. You'll be able to have a portfolio of projects appraised. Many of you talked about having various projects which are not going anywhere because they don't have the right cost-benefit analysis. Well, hopefully you can use this as an opportunity to get the skill, to acquire the skills, to appraise these projects. We hope that this will lead to a cadre of trained individuals at the national level that can go on and do other things with the skills that they acquire through this program. And of course, it will result in various results from sectoral analysis that will also help advance knowledge among your policymakers, but also the international community on what exactly is the likely implication of climate change in places where we really know nothing about. We have lots of assertions, but this kind of thing has not been looked at in much detail. And of course, we'll have a community of practice and mentoring support in order that in order to convey that we're not doing this alone. There is a whole bunch of you out there in other countries who are doing similar work that hopefully we can foster some learning and cross-fertilization. All right, so how do we get there? Well, we're committing to a 2-year capacity building program. So 2 years in order to try and make a dent into this, where country teams will conduct various relevant project appraisal and sector analysis. So one thing I want to emphasize here is this is not about sending in consultants from various places to do the work in your countries. It's really to provide the training for you and your colleagues so that they can do the work as part of their regular job, right? So it's going to be, it's going to require some work, and it's going to require all of you to come meet us halfway, because otherwise it's not going to work. It'll end up, all of this will end up as a report somewhere, and I mean, to be honest, I'm really not interested in that, and I don't think many of you are either. We would like to have maybe 4 or 5 regional gatherings over the coming 2 years, combined with in-country support, where region-based and international experts will come and provide the training and the mentoring to your teams in-country. But you'll also have an opportunity to come and share and learn from each other. We definitely need to link this to other ongoing initiatives. We already know that there's a massive program by UNU, ISP, which is doing exactly this, as I have described, but it's focused only on climate modeling and vulnerability analysis. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with them closely, we're going to talk to them, and we've already started this process where this kind of, where the economics of adaptation can be, combined with this ongoing initiative, because it's going to be guaranteed that many of the same people who are part of that probably need to be involved in this. And you probably know who these people are already. And then, of course, there are various UNDP, USAID, and other adaptation and non-adaptation initiatives which are extremely relevant for this. So we want to make sure that we really recognize the synergies and maximize on and ensure that the resources and the opportunity we have is of value added. And here are some of these things. I mean, this is just UNDP led efforts from the Asia Pacific Regional Center. We talked about the LDCF program, we talked about the CPIR, but there are other things. There's a local governance practitioners program. There's work on social protection that's happening. There's work on, our colleagues in the disaster risk unit division are leading, which have a lot of relevance to this. We need to ensure there are linkages with all of these things so we don't duplicate and we don't waste valuable time of people, particularly your counterparts in various government ministries, going from workshop to workshop and not actually doing anything else other than that. All right, and this is just to give you a flavor that all of you have financing in place for this through the Adaptation Fund and the Least Developed Country Fund. In fact, the financing is already there, and you are expected to use it to advance some of this work. So you want to link it to that. And I've already spoken to many of you about this, and you recognize that. Maldives is one, Pakistan is another. We need to make sure that these things are linked with there are some of these projects which are still in the pipeline and they're about to be approved, like the one in Indonesia. But many of these other ones are already quite advanced. In fact, Philippines is the only one that's probably in the design phase. But as far as I can tell, everything else is already in place and under implementation. So we can talk about this a little bit more. All right. So what happens now? Well, the immediate next step is for you to comment on this so that we can then reflect on your views. But after, assuming we get some consensus, you will obviously need to go back and discuss this with your counterparts, your colleagues, and others. And if this is something that you would like to make use of, you will have to let us know by the end of January next year. This will be essentially a training through a series of in-country and regional meetings. We already talked about that. We will, as the organizers, reflect on the comments that you will make shortly, put this in writing so that you also have a document that you can share with your colleagues and get their input. But that's the immediate next step that has to follow once we leave. Now, what's sort of the draft outline for the various activities, if you like, over the coming 2 years? Well, starting by end of January 2013, we'll get some feedback from you on what it is that you really want to do, which kinds of questions you want to answer, whether you want to start by focusing on the project appraisal, skill building, or whether you want to get started on the sector level work, or both. We will, by end of March 2013, once that decision has been made, we will organize another regional-based training. Most likely it'll be here, unless, well, somewhere in the region, obviously. And then soon after that, technical training, which will be really about, how do you apply some of the tools that we've talked about in this meeting in the context of various projects that you will bring with you. And or sector level analysis between April and October, November next year. The country teams will start working on those things in their countries. We will provide support, technical support, so that trainings can be conducted in country as well. We will also try and have some policy level engagement so that the sensitization element also is not ignored, but it moves forward concurrently. We'll have another technical training towards the end of end of the year, November, December. I know it's not a very good time because there are lots of things happening, most notably the COP. And then in 2014, further country support, analysis, and policy dialogue. And then we'll have maybe in the second or third quarter, another region-based training where results from the country exercises can be shared. And then finally have a ministerial level dialogue where you can essentially showcase, or your colleagues can showcase results and from this work. Now this is obviously a draft plan. There are lots of things which are moving around. The NAP work is about to commence. Lots of other things are ongoing, which I'm sure will require some amendment. But just so that we have in our minds some clear steps forward, we wanted to put this forward.